Welcome to the Documentary Review Podcast. In this episode, let me try that again. In this episode, Jonathan and I argue like Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel as we look at the 2014 documentary Life Itself. Welcome to the podcast. I am PT.
And I'm Jonathan. Glad you can join us.
Yeah, I was just making some crazy faces for a bonus for those of you who watch the video. You know, not too many people watch our videos. I don't know, which is fine. I mean, I'm glad people are listening on iTunes, which is great. But did you know we have a YouTube channel where you can come by and if you want to see us? But
yeah, in case you haven't actually checked out the YouTube channel, I'm extremely good looking, so you can always watch live too. So
I was gonna say maybe you should. Because we're probably better looking at your imagination than in real life. I've had that experience with multiple podcasts where I like listen and I'm like, man, these guys are cool. Then I like see them, they do a video or something, and I'm like, ooh, those guys do not look like I expected them to look. But it's a whatever audio visual medium. But we're here to talk about life itself. So Jonathan, what's this movie about?
It is about a well-known film critic, Robert Ebert, and
let me stop you there, because it's definitely not Robert Ebert. It's Roger Ebert.
Roger Ebert, sorry.
Sorry?
I'm already drinking wine. Right. I blew my first line
You're usually like all over the synopsis. They're usually spot on point. But so there you go. That's strike one. We'll let you have it.
Yeah. Anyhow, so it's steals its title from a memoir he wrote called Life Itself, and it basically follows him through the last, I believe, 5 months of his life. And while you're kind of following him through interviews, from himself and his friends and family, you're also seeing the history of his life and kind of his ideas about life seen from his current state, which is the end of his battle with cancer. And that is Life Itself.
All right. Thanks for joining.
Yeah.
Cool. So what did you think? Give us your brief yes, like it or don't like it before we
like it for sure. I was a strong like on this one. You?
Oh man, I really hated it. No, I'm just kidding. I wanted to get us to fight. I was really hoping you'd be like it. I was hoping you'd be like, yeah, it's all right, or something.
I was hoping the same, that you would kind of be like, nah, I didn't like it, but no, I have to say this was I think this is my favorite documentary that we've reviewed to date.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, well, this is going to be a boring. No, it'll still be a good review. Just won't be a lot of conflict involved in it.
This will not be Siskel and Ebert approved. Man, so first of all, when we go into this documentary, I was shockingly, pleasantly surprised to learn pretty quickly up front that it was directed by one of my favorite, I may not know thousands of documentary filmmakers by any means, but one of my favorites, who is Steve James, who also directed Hoop Dreams and directed this documentary called Stevie, which is a really good documentary about like he was a Big Brother in the Big Brother program, and 15 years later he goes back to find his little brother or whatever, and he is not doing well. So that's pretty good documentary too. But anyway, he's an awesome documentary filmmaker, and I was super excited to see it was by him because I was like, man, this is definitely not going to be incompetently made. At least I know that.
Right, and it wasn't. It was yeah. I don't even know where to start. I like so many different things about this documentary.
Well, go ahead. Were you?
No, I was just going to say, it kind of kicks off. It kicks off and lets you know right away that obviously it's no secret that he dies. But it kind of kicks off and it just like flat out says, hey, this is going to be the last 5 months of his life, and we put together this like aggressive filming schedule to kind of capture that. But then it almost immediately cuts into, and I think this is what made it such a great documentary. It cuts into, him, and he's battling cancer, and his jaw's been removed, so he can't speak. He has to use Stephen Hawking is kind of a little translator where it just types and then it translates the into a machine voice or whatever. It's how it communicates. But I mean, it's certainly like there is. It is very, very raw and gritty to see, that the condition his body is in, and they don't hide it at all. They don't do anything to mask the good or the bad in this. It's really a good, observant documentary. Even when they go back and follow through his life, the whole documentary is like that, where they don't just gloss over the bad parts. They bring everything to light, and they don't really. There's no like. It's very subjective, as far as the filmmaking perspective of it, and again, like the editing perspective of it, where, they show these great things that he's done and achievements in his life, and then they also show like, hey, this is some really shady stuff that the guy did, and I think all of our lives are like that. It's a blend of the good and bad. But normally, when you see a film, especially about someone who's passed away, it's like, look at all the amazing things they did, and everything was great, and like to give an example, like two things that stood out in my mind. They have one moment where Roger's talking about, oh my gosh, I'm really glad that I didn't get like hit by a bus or didn't just die instantly or anything like that. That I had this 13-year battle, that I was able to think about my life and where I wanted to leave and be able to write and do all these things that I wouldn't have been able to do, had he just got, died without knowing death was coming. But then there's also a part where his wife is talking and she says, hey, and I mean, like that moment is kind of like one of those like moments you want to see in a film. You know what I mean? Those good fuzzy feelings, even in the bad parts or whatever of a life, that you still have that positive attitude. And then later on, you see his wife saying, he passed me a note one time that just said, "Kill me," and then her reaction to that, and she goes into it. But that's obviously like a horrible moment, and I think that is what life is. You know what I mean? You have those great moments where you are fighting and succeeding, and those horrible moments too, and it doesn't gloss over either. So that's kind of probably the guts of why I like this so much.
Yeah, and I think it's a there's a lot to unpack there, because it's an interesting testament to the filmmaker for one thing, but also it reflects. It's kind of like, if you look at it on a meta level, like one of the big themes of Roger Ebert's kind of professional life is like he is friends with a lot of the filmmakers, and he seems to really take a lot of pride in like discovering new filmmakers and really kind of like developing relationships with them. And he takes some criticism for that, like, can you be objective if you're friends with them? And of course he kind of argues that yes, you can, and they show some examples of him giving bad reviews to his friends' movies and stuff like that, and this whole movie is kind of an example of that as well, because you've got this. I mean, it seemed pretty much like Steve James was probably pretty good friends with Roger Ebert from the what we saw, I would say, and but yet he is able to remain pretty objective, like you said, and show us the good and the bad, and yeah, it's beautiful. Couple other things about one thing I was going to say is, okay, so I've got a MacBook much like Roger Ebert. It is funny, like the thing that he was doing on his MacBook to talk, like that's just a program that's built into the Mac or whatever. And I recently I'm in the editing process of a novel, and one of the things I do when I'm done with the novel is I have the computer read it to me, so that, because like I'm better at catching typos, like if it's, if I'm listening to it than if I'm just reading it on the page. So I just got done with like 40 hours in the last week of listening to that exact voice, and I was like, oh man, it's the guy, it's my guy. So that was funny.
Good to know.
It's funny too that like he doesn't have some like super high tech like program. He's just
he's just
typing it into his MacBook, but hey, it works.
Sure.
The other thing too that I was gonna respond to that you were saying about the grittiness is, that was one thing I really appreciated too. Is obviously as a society and just as human beings, we try not to think about that end of life stuff too much, and especially like the ugly side of it, like the ugly medical stuff. We put people in the hospital room and shut the door or whatever. But that's I think it's important stuff to talk about and to deal with, because hey, we're all going to be there someday. Even we might not have our jaw removed, hopefully, but But really, the end of everyone's life is is pretty horrible. Not to be a total doubter, but all of us are going to go through some horrible stuff at some point, and I really liked Roger's whole attitude of being like so transparent about it all and being and wanting to show it and being excited that they're showing all the gritty stuff, and because I think that's important stuff that we don't talk about enough and see enough.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's if we were if everyone was like that, because like I said, he had a jaw removed, which one that alone is a pretty disturbing thing to look at. I mean, like he and and then he even showed like some of the procedures where they like suction his throat or whatever, because obviously he can't like swallow correctly. I assume that's why they do that, because there's no bottom jaw. And that again is pretty disturbing. But by the end of the documentary, like it was hard to watch at first. I mean, just like seeing him without his jaw, I mean that's kind of a disturbing image, and like you could literally see like into his mouth, which was hanging open because over time, he had his jaw removed for quite a few years, and that skin is stretched so you can like see through it, down to the gauze in the back behind where you'd normally have your lower jaw. And it was really hard to watch at first. And by the end of the documentary, I was a little more comfortable with it. I think if we were all more open with illness and the fact that in the end of it, we're tissue wrapped in bones, and sometimes that goes wrong, and because we're so hush hush about it and we all want to hide that, we're a little shunned at the end of our lives when we start to get sick and we start to get ill and when we get kind of pushed out. And maybe if more people were open like he was in this, we wouldn't be that way, and that end time would be a little better for everyone.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I don't know about you, but like at the very beginning when I first started watching it and they're showing it, I was like, "Ooh, this is gonna be a rough watch." I don't know about this, but yeah, you're right. I mean, by the end, I was definitely used to it. So
Right.
interesting. Yeah, so much to talk about here. Let's go back into Roger's life a little bit. One thing that actually really surprised me is they talked about at the beginning, like I assumed he was going to be some guy who's just like always super obsessed with film and like maybe trying to be a director or something, and just this is how he got into the industry. But it's the way it was presented in the documentary was that he just wanted to be a reporter, and he was a reporter, and they would just assign basically anyone to be the film critic, and he's just happened to get assigned to that, and then kind of fell in love with it and took it to the next level, and made a name for himself instead of just having a random whoever assigned. But I was surprised by how he got into it, that it wasn't like some passion for film that got him into it. It was just he got assigned and loved it.
I agree. It was and not only that, but like he was so passionate about being a writer, like a reporter, really, that it seemed odd that he just like fell backwards into film critic. Like I would have thought that he would have pushed back when they handed him the film critic, position. And I think that's what it was at the time. I mean, granted, that was before there was really much of a thing, much of a film critic role. I mean, films were still relatively new. I would have thought he'd be like, nah, I want more hard-hitting pieces, because you see, he was the editor of his school paper, which was U of I, in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. But the editor there, and was really into the paper, and then got a job not at some tiny paper after that, but worked for Chicago Tribune, or no, not Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times. So yeah, and they just said, here you go, have a have a
Yeah,
film critic role.
yeah, and it was interesting to see, like they talked a little bit about his life. It was almost like he lived a whole little mini life before his film critic thing. I mean, he was young and everything, but like he had a bunch of, they pointed out some of like his kind of influential stuff he did at the college paper, and he also like developed a drinking problem and kind of beat it, I think, really before he before he
Yeah,
started his film critic role. So like yeah, he lived a whole life pretty quickly there.
did, he hadn't. Sorry, I didn't take his detailed notes. I wasn't able to this time as I normally do. So was he actually? Did he finish, or did he like quit drinking prior to becoming a film critic? I thought it was after,
Yeah,
like
it could be.
shortly after he was already a film critic.
Yeah, it could
But
be. Um, Definitely early in the whole film though. But yeah, it was interesting to see how he was like kind of the hard hitting reporter going to the bar with the other reporters, and it was cool to see that side of
Yeah,
him.
again, and that was very cool too because again, they didn't hold anything back. They showed how he developed a drinking problem and became an alcoholic. And although he kicked it like a man, holy cow, generally he was, yeah, like even the story of how he tells about having his last drink. He's drinking on like a Saturday, like in the morning, drinking stiff drinks and crashed out, and then like was like, all right, well that was the last drink I ever took, and that was it.
Yeah,
Most people, it's a little more difficult than that.
right.
You just That's it,
He did.
done.
He did go to AA though, so
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, like, not to make light of it or whatever, but I mean, I think
right.
most people that go to AA still don't have that, like, yeah, I just was like, this is it, and that was it.
Yeah,
Normally get a couple relapses in between, and yeah,
yeah.
so.
Um, so what was your take on the whole? And I already touched on it a little bit, but the way he kind of developed friendships and stuff like that with people inside of the industry.
You know, I mean, I don't know, it really worked for him. I mean, like, I think, like, I would have said it's a horrible idea, but it wasn't. I mean, like, in hindsight, like, you know, he seemed to do a really good job of you know keeping objective when he was reviewing films, and I think it's kind of interesting, and I think like part of that also kind of just shows his ego. That not only he wasn't there just to observe and report, he took a role inside that world. I mean, one, he wrote a screenplay, and he, yeah, befriended all these people, and then you're right, not only befriended, but then like launched careers. If he found somebody that he thought was special, he'd really push their material and basically make their careers. So I don't know. I mean, I guess that was part of who he was, and that's part of what made, again, I keep going back to it, what made it cool is because that's his egotism, and like I mean that's really not a good character trait at all. I mean, that guy was like super opinionated, wanted everything his way, really egotistical, and they didn't like brush any of that under the rug. They were like, yeah, this guy could be a totally egotistical jerk. Even his friends like kind of said that, and which is kind of endearing. I mean, it's just saying that guy's human, he had faults, and a lot of times you just brush that under the rug, especially after somebody dies.
Right.
So
Um, yeah, yeah. It is interesting how he made that all work, and it seemed like he was like really close with some of the filmmakers. Like they talked about how he gave that one filmmaker like a puzzle that Hitchcock gave to Marilyn Monroe or something. It was all kinds of weird stuff. Like he seemed like he was very and filmmakers were coming to visit him when he was in the hospital. Seemed like it was more than just a passing relationship. They were very. It seemed like he got pretty close to a lot of these people.
yeah, it did. Even like Scorsese seemed to be like really friends or whatever with them, or even like he was indebted to them for helping him out in a dark period in his life and bringing him back to cinema and things like that. And it was like you could tell yeah, like you said, it wasn't just like some critic out there.
Right. And Werner Herzog was in it, which I always like it when Werner Herzog is in stuff. He's a riot. Had mentioned that since we're a documentary podcast. Um, yeah. So, but it's interesting that a critic can have a relationship with with an artist and give an objective review. Let me
Right.
ask you this, just totally out of the blue. Have you, because you live like pretty much off social media, I'd say you're not a big social media guy by any
It's
means.
right around zero. Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you: have you heard the term Gamergate?
Beamergate?
Gamergate, like video
Oh,
game gamer
no.
gate. All right,
No, I
good.
have no idea what you're talking about.
Good. All right. Well, all right. It's this horrible thing where all these people were like, it's supposedly about like ethics in video game journalism, and like but it's this horrible thing. Anyway, I was just curious. It's like it's taken over much of social media with all these threats towards women and all this stuff. So I was just curious if how much it breached out of the social media world. But I'm glad to see it hasn't breached out too much because screw those guys.
Okay.
And hopefully they never hear that, or they will attack us in mass. That's their MO.
Ooh.
Um,
Well, I'll be hard to attack unless someone actually physically comes to my residence. I don't have a lot of, as Tyler's pointed out, online presence.
right. All right, so that's my anti-Gamergate thing. Yeah, it's interesting too, kind of along those same notes. They talk a lot about the popularization of criticism, like Roger Ebert's school of film criticism that they did, like on their TV show and stuff, versus like the technical criticism, film criticism, like and this definitely impacts us because of like what we do on this show, and like I do book reviews on YouTube, and sometimes there's backlash against people who do things like we're doing right now, to just basically giving our thoughts and feelings about works and saying like that's not what criticism is. Criticism has to be, looking at things objectively and comparing it to the great works of the genre and blah blah blah, all that stuff, which all that has its place in my opinion. But in my opinion, this kind of thing that we're doing, obviously, and the stuff that Siskel and Ebert did on their show, definitely has its place too. I mean, art is meant to give us, to elicit feelings in us and elicit opinions, and that's what makes art great, is that we can talk about it and think about it and feel about it, and just because we're not, breaking it down in the official approved way, I think there's nothing wrong with that.
Right, exactly. I think the real answer to that is both have their place, like you said. That I'm nothing against critics that do break things down and tear apart the technical aspects and everything like that. But I think there's a huge place for just sitting around. And in fact, that was there was one point in there where they even said, like a great way they'd love to review movies essentially is what we're doing right now, just hanging out with a group of people and talking about it for a couple hours. But you can't put that on television. You couldn't. That can't be, Siskel and Ebert. Anything that people are going to watch, en masse. One, because it takes too long, and two, we're a short attention span kind of society. It's just wouldn't fly on television.
Right. So yeah, so let's get into that a little bit. So getting into the Siskel and Ebert thing. So Ebert, of course, is from the Sun-Times, kind of has more of a blue-collar attitude, that newspaper, and then Siskel is from the Tribune, which was seen more as like the whiter, more white-collar, more affluent newspaper, maybe a little more stuck-up type film criticism, and they really didn't like each other, and they got put together on this TV show, and that to me was one of the more interesting parts of this documentary, was watching their crazy relationship, because it was pretty complicated and interesting relationship in my opinion.
Very much so, and it was cool that they spent so much, it was a big part of the documentary too, was that relationship and their show and the way they interacted, which was pretty damn funny.
Yeah, the best part was they showed like outtakes from like them filming some promo spots for their TV show, and like between every take they would just be bitching at each other and saying how you're an idiot and you're fat and you're whatever. It was pretty funny.
It was pretty funny, and Siskel would have. You could do a documentary on him. It seemed like just like, because obviously they kind of gloss over it. He was essentially the supporting character of this, but they're like, oh yeah, I forget where he went to school. I think at Yale, and then he hung out with Hugh Hefner and the Playboy Mansion for a long time, and it's like what? And all these shots of him and Hugh Hefner in a private jet with bunnies and stuff like that. What? I'd like to see a little more of that backstory. It just seems crazy. But anyway, yeah, and like you said, they ended up together on their show, which worked like magic. I mean, the fact that they were both, truly passionate about the subject and about their opinions of the films that they watched. So it was a cool dynamic. And they're both really smart and opinionated, and they luckily happen to have pretty regularly conflicting opinions, which made it interesting.
Right. Yeah, I thought that someone, I don't remember who it was in the documentary, but someone made a good point about how like it was such a cool thing and it showed what's cool about movies and that like if it was like if a book critic writes a review or something, you'd probably be like, oh, well, I didn't, okay, I didn't realize that that's what that book was about or whatever. I guess I missed the whole point on that if you had a different opinion on a book. But with the movie critics says, if someone disagrees with their review, they come right up to their desk and start arguing with them about it. And it's pretty cool. It's a genre that we all kind of feel like we own and are experts in our own way, as evidenced by this very podcast. So that was
Sure.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. And I think, yeah, again, yeah, I mean, like, obviously we do documentary films here, but, normal films are amazing just for that reason. Obviously give all of us that connection. And in fact, I think one of the first scenes is Roger Ebert talking about that connection that we all get and that kind of glimpse into humanity and what makes people people, just sitting there in the theater watching the piece of art, which is, I think a great way to look at film.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it was cool to see over the years, like there's a couple quotes saying where one of them said about the other one that I've never felt closer to a man in my life than I did sometimes with him and stuff like that. So it's interesting that they had that friendship there too as well. Eventually. Um,
Yeah, eventually. I think that took some time.
so we're both
And
we're
and I
both
think like the other,
good.
I was gonna say, the other thing that was really important, the key moment with Gene Siskel was his death and the way he approached it. He took the exact opposite way that Roger Ebert took, where he hid it and just completely hid it. And I absolutely understand the philosophy of that, where he got a brain tumor, he had a terminal diagnosis, and instead of telling everyone, he completely hid it from everyone, including Roger and
And including his kids.
including his kids. But I mean, I understand that in a way because his kids were young. I mean, it would be one thing if they were adults,
Right.
but they were young, and he wanted them to remember him as their dad. You know what I mean? And I understand that, where he's like and like that. That was the quote by his wife. Was, they had a year full of happy birthdays and Christmas and events, and they remember that's their memory of the dad was a cool, the way he wanted to be remembered, the way he lived his life, and not, as a sickly guy where the whole time they're like, dad's dying and put him through that trauma. I mean, I'm not saying either philosophy is right, but I understand both.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely see both. Um, I mean, I shouldn't judge, I guess, but and part of me wants to say that is kind of a selfish way to do it because you're being like, well, I don't want to see my kids be sad, so I'm going to not tell them. When probably for them it would have been a heck of a lot healthier to be able to like come to terms with it and be able to say goodbye and all that stuff before
Yeah, well, I
before
mean,
important.
I
But
assume they knew at the end. Obviously he had to get really sick towards the end. Where
right, right,
they, is 3 weeks worse than the last year of, you know, having that healthy time for 10 months and then 2 months of whatever being really sick. I don't know, but it certainly affected Roger Ebert, where he was like, screw that, that's the wrong way to do it, and really took the opposite approach. So
yep. He was like, get a camera up in here and look at how I don't have a jaw.
look at that. You see a jaw here? No, you don't.
No, you do
Deal with
not.
that. Not hiding it.
Yep. No, and then a lot of the rest of the film was dealing with his illness and stuff, and as we talked about, and how it affected his seemed like he had a great relationship with his wife, and talked. She was in the documentary a lot and talking about their experiences, and then Steve James comes into the film a little bit, kind of, and the fact that he's trying to make this documentary becomes a little bit of a bit of the story because he's trying to get Roger Ebert to answer questions, and they've got this big interview planned, and as Roger's getting sicker and sicker, it's becoming less possible to continue answering the questions. Which I was bummed out that he didn't answer the question when the one question was, why did you call your memoir Life Itself? We never got an answer to that.
Never got an answer to that. It's like, damn it.
Take it. But yeah. So the kind of final thing that I thought was cool that I had written down was that one, I liked how they kind of talked about how like the beauty in just his writing, and how even though he spent his life writing about other people's pieces of artwork, you really reveal a lot about yourself in your writing, no matter what you're writing about. And I like the way they kind of took that approach and looked at his writing as art itself, and took little pieces of that to kind of showcase what his view of the world was. That was nicely done.
Yeah. Agreed. It was cool. It was, I don't know, the whole all the little snippets they took too from all his memoirs, and blending all of it together definitely worked really well.
Yeah. And he has the Illinois license plate that says movies. So
awesome, very cool.
Very, very good job. Cool. So anything else you wanted to talk about life itself?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. Certainly worth the time for anybody out there that wants to remind themselves to appreciate, every little moment of their life, and watch out for jaw cancer. It's terrible.
Yeah. And get a MacBook just in case.
In case.
Need one. You'll be ready.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So what are you going to give this bad boy in the star rating system?
I'm gonna go all out. I'm going 5 stars.
All right.
My first 5 star.
Ooh, nice. All right. I too am going to give it 5 stars, which will make this our first official perfect documentary on the podcast.
There you go. There's no doubt that you should go see this.
Yes.
100%.
Perfect. 100% of critics on this podcast agree. You should see it. Cool. So that's life itself. Do you have some choices for next week lined up?
I do have some stuff lined up. I've got 3 choices kind of at random. I was a little rushed this week, but I think all 3 are, well, actually I've only seen one. So first one is Fed Up, which is the Katie Couric film about basically the food industry and obesity in America and all that stuff, which there are many documentaries about said topic, but this one's a pretty decent one. The second one is called Pump, which is basically exploring our dependence on oil, how we got there, and I assume they're going to probably push the idea that we shouldn't have such a heavy dependence on oil. And the last one is called Misrepresentation, which is basically talking about the stereotypical images of women in our society, and whether that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, or if it's just a reflection of what actually exists.
Okay.
Yeah.
So three documentaries about why the world's going to hell. What's wrong with us? Let's call these the What's Wrong with Us
Deal. 3 What's Wrong with Us choices.
All right. We've I think I want to go with the misrepresentation, because we've kind of looked at the environmental stuff recently, and I don't think we've done any food related ones yet, but
we haven't, which I found kind of shocking, because there's so many out there, so many different food and diet films and farming and whatever, all those.
Right. But yeah, I want to check out Misrepresentation.
Cool. Then we might get a lot of hate mail from that one. So.
All right.
Let's see how we do that. Well, it depends what how we react to a documentary about stereotyping women.
That's true. Gamergate will be all over us.
That's true. We are 2 guys, so we are going to be treading on thin ice.
Yes. All right. So join us next week as we take a look at Misrepresentation. That'll do it. Email us at feedback@documentaryreviewpodcast.com. Check us out on iTunes. Leave us a review. do whatever you do. I'm not going to make you do anything. Do what you want. But we would appreciate it. Come by the old YouTube channel, subscribe, and look at our pretty faces. I will talk to you next time. This is PT. Keep it real.
This is Jonathan. We'll see you next week.
Boom. Stopping.